The room fell silent when they announced her name. His 23-year-old daughter, barely 3 months into the company, no real experience, still struggling to explain what our division even did, and somehow I was expected to clap. After 7 years of carrying this company through chaos, impossible deadlines, and emergencies no one else could solve, I was supposed to smile as they handed her the future I had built piece by piece. I swallowed the humiliation, forced my hands together, but something inside me cracked. They had no idea the systems they depended on were mine, or what would unravel once I walked away if moments like this finally crossed too close to home. For 7 years, I had told myself the long nights, the missed weekends, the bone-deep exhaustion were temporary sacrifices for a future I believed I had earned. I wasn't chasing recognition or praise. I wanted stability. I wanted to give my son a life where he didn't grow up watching his mother drowning in work while pretending it didn't hurt. When I first joined Pacific Meridian Freight, I was genuinely grateful just to be hired. After my divorce, starting over felt like trying to haul a freight ship forward with bare hands. But I showed up every day, determined to rebuild something solid. Slowly, people began coming to me for answers, long before management ever did. Shipments stalled in Tacoma, clients erupted over customs delays, a warehouse fire shut down northern routes overnight. Every crisis landed on my desk, and every time, I fixed it. Quietly, methodically, holding the backbone of the operation together until something snapped, and then being the only one who could put it back in place. My coworkers noticed, my clients noticed, and Victor Harland, our regional vice president, noticed too, but only when it benefited him. Every performance review was spotless, always ending with the same line, "Ava, stay patient, your time is coming." And I believed him, because what choice did I really have? I had a teenager at home, looming college costs, a mortgage I had refinanced twice, and a career I couldn't afford to lose. Victor knew all of that. He knew I needed the job. He knew I wouldn't rock the boat, and for years that knowledge worked perfectly in his favor. I became the person who knew every supplier from Portland to Boise by name, who tracked patterns no one else bothered to see, memorized freight schedules, and spotted disruptions before they turned into disasters. My work made Victor look brilliant in meetings, and he loved that. As long as I stayed quiet, loyal, and invisible, I was exactly the kind of employee men like him depended on and never promoted. Still, I carried the weight, convinced loyalty meant something. I believed hard work eventually spoke for itself. For a long time, nothing in my life contradicted that belief strongly enough to break it. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere. Subtle remarks that didn't quite sit right, closed-door meetings I was suddenly excluded from, the unexplained appearance of a second desk in Victor's office long before any announcement was made. I kept telling myself everything was fine, that I just needed to push through one more year. I didn't realize that year would be the one that shattered everything. Chloe Harland walked into our office like someone who had never been told no in her life, and honestly, she carried herself as if she didn't expect to hear it here either. I remember her first morning clearly. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, shoes so pristine they had clearly never touched a warehouse floor. Victor introduced her as if we were meeting royalty instead of a 24-year-old who graduated 6 weeks earlier with a generic business degree and zero experience in maritime logistics. "She's here to observe our operations," Victor said, beaming as though her presence alone elevated the entire building. No one spoke, but the looks passed around the room said everything. Everyone understood what was happening, even if none of us were allowed to say it out loud. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself maybe she'd surprise us, maybe she'd work hard and earn her place. Instead, she was assigned to shadow me, and within the first hour it became painfully obvious she had no idea what we actually did. Her first question was how many packages we handled per day. Packages. We weren't a parcel service. We coordinated container freight across ports, distribution hubs, and inland routes. When I explained that, she nodded politely and asked how many drivers we had on payroll. We didn't have drivers. We contracted carriers. Another smile, another confused nod, another question that made me wonder if she even understood the industry she'd been dropped into. She wasn't rude, not in the loud, abrasive way people expect from executives' children. Her entitlement was quieter, more insidious. It was the assumption that her place here was natural, inevitable, preordained. That was almost worse. She took notes obsessively, filling notebooks with bullet points I doubted she'd ever revisit. She sat in on my client calls, scribbling frantically every time someone used technical language, and every time she looked at me with that eager expression, it felt like she expected praise simply for showing up. What struck me most wasn't her lack of knowledge, it was her complete obliviousness to how her presence shifted the room. When I walked into meetings, people straightened, knowing problems were about to be solved. When Chloe walked in, the room stiffened in a different way. Careful, guarded. People weren't worried about her competence, they were worried about what her last name could cost them. At first, I tried to teach her sincerely. I explained supply chain choke points, port delays, vessel schedules, and the fragile relationships with carriers that kept our lanes alive. She listened, but nothing truly stuck. Still, Victor spoke about her as if she were a rising star, praising her fresh perspective. This was the same woman whose most insightful comment in 3 weeks had been asking why cargo ships couldn't just take shorter routes. The tension didn't erupt all at once, it seeped into the cracks. She started appearing in executive meetings I had no business attending. Decisions I once influenced quietly bypassed me and went straight through her. Colleagues who used to ask for my guidance began asking, "Has Chloe seen this yet?" As if approval from someone who didn't know what a TEU was suddenly mattered more than experience. Each shift tightened something in my chest, small changes stacking on top of one another until the air felt different, less respectful, less honest. The morning it happened, the office felt unnaturally quiet, like everyone already knew something I didn't. I walked into the conference room expecting another routine quarterly update. Victor would talk too long, say too little, and I'd mentally rehearse the reports I'd prepared. I'd been doing the heavy lifting on our coastal redistribution model for months, convinced this would finally be acknowledged. People looked at me with expressions that felt almost hopeful, small smiles, encouraging nods. For one foolish second, I let myself believe this might finally be my moment. Then Victor walked in, Chloe at his side. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, clutching a folder like it held lines she was afraid to forget. Something in my chest tightened. Victor cleared his throat and demanded the room's attention. "Before we begin," he said, "I'd like to make a very important announcement." Every eye shifted first to him, then to me. Heat rushed to my face. He placed a hand on Chloe's shoulder, smiling with the kind of pride usually reserved for awards or weddings. "Effective immediately," he said, "Chloe Harland will be stepping into the role of Regional Operations Director." The words didn't register at first. My mind rejected them, like static instead of language. Chloe blinked, stunned by her own promotion. Then the applause started, hesitant at first, then growing into a forced, uncomfortable rhythm. I sat frozen, rooted to my chair. My name wasn't mentioned, my work wasn't acknowledged. 7 years of crisis management, of long nights and silent victories, erased in a single sentence. I forced myself to clap, my hands numb. I watched Chloe's wide, trembling smile, disbelief and delight flickering across her face. She had been here barely 3 months, still mispronouncing half our carrier partners' names, still unable to outline a distribution lane if her life depended on it. And now she was stepping into the future I had spent nearly a decade preparing for. Victor beamed like a man convinced he'd made a bold, visionary decision. "I want to acknowledge someone who has been crucial in preparing Chloe," he said, turning toward me. My heart jumped for a split second. I thought maybe he would offer context, gratitude, something to soften the blow. Instead, he said, "Ava has been invaluable getting Chloe up to speed." Up to speed, as if everything I had built had been nothing more than a training program for his daughter's accelerated ascent. I nodded, mechanical, unable to trust my voice. The room buzzed with polite congratulations. No one held my gaze for long. The betrayal didn't explode. It pressed in, slowly, suffocating, tightening around my throat until breathing felt like work. When the meeting ended, people lined up to shake Chloe's hand, offering praise they didn't truly mean. I gathered my notebook, moving carefully, trying to steady my hands. As I reached the door, Victor caught my arm. "Ava, stick around for a moment," he said, lowering his voice as if he were doing me a favor. The room emptied until it was just us. Victor leaned back against the table, loosening his tie like he'd survived something difficult. "I know this might come as a surprise," he said, "but Chloe brings fresh perspective." Fresh perspective? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I stayed silent. "You understand, right? It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. Promoting his unqualified daughter over the person who had practically run the division for years wasn't personal. Expecting me to swallow it quietly wasn't personal. Assuming I was too dependent on the job to object wasn't personal. "I understand perfectly," I said, and I did. I saw the manipulation, the empty promises, the invisible ceiling I had been told to wait beneath. Victor relaxed, mistaking my clarity for acceptance. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. I returned to my desk on autopilot, the way people move after a car accident when they're still trying to process the impact. My coworkers avoided my eyes, afraid of what they might reveal. Anger, sympathy, relief that it wasn't them, fear of the politics pulsing beneath the surface. I kept myself together, but something inside me went very still. Not broken, not defeated, just painfully, sharply awake. I stayed late that night, partly because I didn't want to carry the humiliation home with me, and partly because work had always been the one place where I felt in control. I finished the routing report no one would read, updated the vendor audit Victor had asked for and then ignored, and tried to convince myself maybe I could survive this if I just kept my head down. I didn't believe it, but I tried. By 8 p.m., the office was empty except for the cleaning crew humming quietly through the hallways. I got up to stretch and walked toward the break room, craving coffee, even though I knew it would keep me awake all night. As I passed Victor's office, I heard voices, low, tense, unmistakably private. I froze. The door was cracked just enough for sound to slip through. I should have kept walking. I should have respected the boundary. But something inside me already knew this conversation was about me, and I couldn't turn away. "The board's going to ask questions," a man said. I recognized the voice, Raymond Lee, our corporate liaison. "Chloe's only been here a few months." Victor let out a breathy laugh, the kind he used to downplay seriousness. "They'll get over it. She's family, and she has the degree." "What about Ava?" Raymond asked. "She's been running this division quietly for years. Didn't you tell the board she was the strongest candidate?" Silence. Then Victor said, "Ava's reliable, but she's not leadership material." My stomach twisted. Reliable, like a functioning door hinge. Useful? Unnoticed? Unpromotable? Raymond wasn't convinced. Her experience outweighs Chloe's entire resume.
"Experience is fine," Victor said, "but Ava won't go anywhere. She needs this job. Single mom, mortgage, expenses. She'll keep her head down." My lungs felt tight, like the air had thickened into syrup. He wasn't just talking about my work, he was talking about my life, my struggles, my vulnerabilities. All the things I thought made me resilient, he saw them as chains to keep me in place. "She'll fall in line," Victor added, confidence dripping from his voice. "She always does." The words burned in my ears. Fall in line. It wasn't an evaluation, it was a sentence, a decision made without me based on assumptions about my desperation. They weren't rewarding loyalty, they were exploiting it. Raymond sighed. "The directors will want justification." "They'll get one," Victor replied. "You know how it goes. Youth, innovation, fresh thinking. whatever buzzwords they want, and Ava will do what she always does, quietly support us. Something shifted inside me. Small, final, irreversible. The kind of shift you don't recover from because it becomes the dividing line between who you were and who you're about to become. I backed away from the doorway silently, my hands cold despite the heated office. I no longer felt humiliation. I no longer felt anger. What I felt was clarity. Blinding, absolute clarity. I knew exactly what my future looked like if I stayed. More stolen opportunities, more invisible labor, more manipulation disguised as mentorship. I walked back to my desk, shut down my computer, and left the building without a word. The parking lot was dark, the air wet with the smell of rain, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. Victor thought my responsibilities made me powerless. What he didn't understand was that responsibility doesn't chain you, it sharpens you. And he had just handed me the truth I needed to walk away. He thought I would fall in line. He was about to find out what happens when someone like me finally steps out of it. By Friday afternoon, the clarity from that night had solidified into something unshakable. I walked into the office early, finished the last of my pending tasks, and printed my resignation letter on thick, cream-colored paper, the kind people use for real decisions, not impulsive ones. The whole morning felt strangely calm, like the quiet before a storm only I knew was coming. When the clock hit 4:30, I stood, smoothed the front of my blouse, and walked toward Victor's office. He had just finished giving Chloe a tour of what he loudly called her new domain. The phrase still made me nauseous. I knocked. Victor looked up with that half-managerial smile he used to appear approachable. "Ava, come in. How's the transition going?" I handed him the envelope. "This is my 2 weeks' notice." The smile died before he could stop it. His eyebrows shot up, then pulled together into an expression I'd never seen on him before. Fear. "This is a joke, right?" he said, tearing open the envelope. "No," I said, calmly. He read the letter twice, fast the first time, slower the second. His throat tightened. "Ava, you're leaving because of the promotion." I didn't answer. Silence made him nervous, and I wanted him nervous. "We should talk about this," he said, standing. "Don't make a rash decision." "It's not rash. It's overdue." He exhaled through his nose, frustrated. "What about your responsibilities, your son? You need stability. This is impulsive." There it was, his supposed leverage, my life weaponized to keep me compliant. "I'll manage," I said. Victor paced behind his desk, agitation growing. "You realize quitting over this makes you look unprofessional, childish even. You're throwing away everything you've built." I kept my expression flat, letting him hear how pathetic he sounded. "If that's how you see it," I said. He tried a different tactic, leaning forward as if we were old friends. "Look, Ava, you're good at what you do, but you don't want to burn bridges. I can't give you a strong reference if you walk out like this. 5 years of flawless reviews, 2 a.m. crisis calls, port shutdowns I had brought back online, and now he pretended I was a liability. A reference won't be necessary," I said. His face darkened. "You're being emotional," he said. "Let's take the weekend. You come back Monday and we pretend this never happened." "No," I said. "I'll finish my 2 weeks. I'll document everything Chloe needs. After that, I'm done." He laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "You think Chloe needs your documentation? She'll be fine." That lie didn't even sound convincing, and he knew it. Monday morning proved how wrong he was. I found Chloe already at her desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and half-written emails. Her eyes were puffy. "Ava," she whispered, "I've been here since 6. Something's wrong with the Port of Tacoma shipment. Customs flagged a manifest, and Morrison Freight is threatening to cancel their order if we don't fix it today." Morrison, our largest coastal account, the same client who once told me, "Ava, if you ever leave, we're in trouble." "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them I'd look into it," she said, voice trembling. She showed me the email she'd been staring at for hours. She'd pulled the wrong carrier file, the wrong customs form, and an outdated manifest. She didn't even know which vendor handled the flagged cargo. She wasn't incompetent, he was unprepared, thrown into deep water with bricks tied to her feet. I spent 3 hours sorting the mess. Chloe hovered beside me, asking questions, writing notes, trying to understand. Not once did she act like she deserved the job she'd been given, but the consequences of her inexperience would be brutal. By noon, we resolved the crisis, but the relief on her face broke something in me. She wasn't the villain, she was a shield, Victor's way of protecting his power by installing someone too inexperienced to challenge him. Even with the crisis averted, the ripple effects began immediately. 4 major clients called throughout the day, each asking the same question. "Ava, are you still managing our account?" When I told them I'd be leaving in less than 2 weeks, every call ended with unnerving silence, then concern, disappointment, fear. They trusted me, not the company, and they weren't shy about saying it. By the end of the day, Victor summoned me to his office again, and this time Chloe sat in the corner, looking like she'd aged a year overnight. "I hear you're interviewing with competitors," Victor snapped. "I'm exploring opportunities," I said. "While you're still employed here," he shot back. "While you're training Chloe? That's a conflict of interest." "I haven't shared anything proprietary," I said. He slammed his fist lightly on the desk. "Your client relationships are proprietary." "No," I said, finally, letting heat into my voice. "My work built those relationships. They're not property. They're my trust, and trust follows the person who earned it." Victor's face turned red, a pulsing, furious shade. "If you take our accounts with you," he growled, "I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." I stood slowly. "You don't have that power," I said, "but I appreciate the reminder of why I'm leaving." Chloe watched me with wide, guilty eyes. She wasn't angry, she wasn't defensive. She was scared because she knew what her father didn't. The power he thought he had over me was already gone, and the consequences of losing me had only just begun. My last week passed in a strange mix of calm and inevitability, like watching a ship drift toward rocks everyone else pretended not to see. I documented everything Chloe would need: contacts, carrier patterns, crisis protocols, not for Victor, but for the clients and employees who didn't deserve the fallout. On my final Friday, I boxed up my things, handed in my badge, and walked out of Pacific Meridian Freight without looking back. The air felt lighter the moment the door closed behind me. What I didn't realize was how quickly word would spread. By Monday morning, I had 3 missed calls from former clients, 2 from competing carriers, and 1 from a hiring director at Ocean West Logistics, the same firm that had been eyeing our division for years. Their regional director, Daniel Rivers, wanted to meet immediately. When I walked into his office overlooking the Seattle waterfront, he didn't bother with small talk. "Ava," he said, "we've heard what's happening at your old shop. If you're open to it, we'd like you to lead our Northwest operations." The offer landed like a lifeline: 30% higher salary, full benefits, tuition support for my son, and the freedom to shape an entire region the way it should be run. But what struck me most wasn't the money or the title, it was the respect. "We're not hiring your resume," Daniel said. "We're hiring your reputation." No one had ever said that to me before. I accepted the offer the next morning. By the end of the week, 3 of my former clients reached out to Ocean West requesting a transition to my management. It wasn't planned, it wasn't retaliation, it was simple. They trusted me, not Victor's hollow promises. And in our industry, trust moves money fast. Within 3 months, Ocean West's Northwest Division saw a surge in new contracts. Our coastal routes stabilized, partnerships expanded, and Daniel promoted 2 more team members under me, because, in his words, good leadership doesn't hoard power. Meanwhile, Pacific Meridian began to unravel exactly as Victor believed it never would. Chloe tried her best, I truly believe that, but she was drowning without support. Clients complained about missed shipments, misfiled customs documents, delayed carrier payments, issues that would never have slipped under my watch. The Port of Tacoma disaster, an entire shipment locked down due to an unauthorized routing change, hit the newspapers first. Then came the Morrison Freight lawsuit for breach of contract, followed by the board investigation. 6 months after I left, Daniel dropped the latest industry magazine on my desk with a satisfied grin. "Page 3, he said. I opened it.
The headline felt surreal. Pacific Meridian Freight loses 61% of regional revenue. VP terminated amid nepotism investigation. Victor had been fired publicly, aggressively. According to the article, Chloe resigned shortly after and returned to university to pursue a logistics certification. She wasn't the villain, she was the collateral damage of her father's arrogance. I read the piece twice, then closed the magazine. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt done, because the best revenge wasn't destroying them, it was building something better somewhere else. And watching the world finally see the truth I'd known all along wasn't vengeance, it was balance. A year later, I found myself back in Tacoma for a meeting. During a break, I ducked into a small waterfront cafe to catch my breath. I'd barely sat down when I spotted someone in the corner booth, head bent over a textbook, hair in a messy knot, highlighter in hand. Chloe. She looked different, older in the way people look after life has humbled them. When she saw me, she straightened, surprise softening into something like relief. "Ava, hi, what are you doing here?" I told her I was in town for business, and she gestured for me to sit. The textbook in front of her was titled Fundamentals of Supply Chain Integrity. She gave a small, self-conscious smile. "I'm back in school," she said, trying to learn what I thought she already knew. There was no entitlement in her voice, no defensiveness, just honesty and maybe a little grief for what could have been. She looked down at her hands. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry for everything. I wasn't ready. Dad said I'd grow into it, but I never belonged in that role." I studied her face and saw the weight she carried, not guilt over being chosen, but guilt over being used. "You were put in an impossible position," I said. "That wasn't your fault." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Dad still blames you, you know." I didn't flinch. "What do you think?" She closed the textbook slowly. "I think you deserve the promotion, and I think losing you is what broke the company, not anything I did." I paid for both our coffees before leaving. As I walked out into the cool, salt air, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not revenge, just closure. Because sometimes the real justice isn't watching someone fall, it's knowing you finally rose. Life has a way of revealing who people really are, especially in the places we depend on most, our workplaces, our families, our relationships. What happened to me at Pacific Meridian Freight taught me something I should have learned years earlier. Loyalty without boundaries invites exploitation. I spent so long believing hard work would eventually speak for itself, that integrity would automatically be rewarded, that people in power would recognize what I brought to the table. But the truth is simpler and harsher. Some people only value you as long as you're useful to them, and they expect you to stay quiet because they assume you need them more than they need you. When Victor dismissed my worth and gambled on the idea I wouldn't stand up for myself, he wasn't just wrong about my future, he was wrong about his own. His downfall wasn't my revenge, it was the natural consequence of mistaking humility for weakness. Chloe's journey reminded me that not everyone placed in a harmful system is trying to harm you. Sometimes they're victims of someone else's ego. I didn't need to destroy anyone to reclaim my power. I just needed to walk away, rebuild my life on my own terms, and let the truth catch up to the people who ignored it. That's a lesson many of us forget. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. In your own life, pay attention to the spaces where you feel unseen or underestimated. Don't wait for permission to make the changes you already know you need. Value the places that value you back. And remember, the moment you stop letting others define your worth, your life begins moving in a direction that finally makes sense.